Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session in December 2022. And we are going to start on Tuesday with one of my favorite topics these days on scaling security, which is all about how you manage risk and how you manage vulnerabilities. And we're joined by Dr. Sashank Dara, and he's going to take us through his ideas and his vision for how this can all work together. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dennis. So I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. So the topic for my talk is demystifying risk and the future of vulnerability management. Let's see what the details are. So a little bit about me, for those who are not familiar about who am I. So myself, Sashank Dara. So I've been in the industry for almost 18 plus years now in Cisco, Alcatel-Lucent, CDOT, and I've got my PhD from IIIT Bangalore in privacy and threat intel related areas. Have a bunch of US patents in cloud security, network security. Currently the security advisor for many companies in this part of the world, and published over a dozen papers. And currently I'm the CTO, CISO, and co-founder at Seconize. We are a risk and compliance management startup based out of Bangalore. Okay, so about this talk, I would try to put the disclaimer up front. I'm not really a visionary here. I'm just an engineer like most of you on this call, I assume. I'm trying to see the potholes around rather than looking into the sky. A famous quote by Linus in these lines. So in this talk, I'll be mostly covering about the potholes right now. So I'll be covering briefly what is risk. Okay, there are a lot of notions, misconceptions, and things like that. But I'll be trying to, as an engineer, right? I mean, we have to be very clear on what these definitions are and few examples. That's when we really describe the elephant in the room, right? And of course, the future of vulnerability management. Okay, so what is the high-level goal of doing this? Is it purely a theater, a security theater, or really there are certain goals to it? What are different myths? And in order to address the current challenges, what are the potential solution directions that will take us to the future? Okay, so that's about this talk in the next 40 to 45 minutes or so. You can feel free to stop me if you have any questions in between, but you can save your questions for the last as well, because I think while I'm full screen, I'll not be able to see the chat window for any of your questions. Okay, so demystifying risk. Now, what is it? What it is not? Right? So let's see what it is not. What is not risk? Okay. So what is not a risk? Just existence of any vulnerability is not really a risk, right? I'm sure, I mean, many people may agree, may not agree, but hopefully by end of this talk, I'll be able to convince you that just a mere existence of a vulnerability is not risk yet. Okay. Absence of control. What if somebody has not deployed a control, an infosec control, like say a firewall or anti-malware or a DLP solution? Is that a risk? Well, not really. Okay. Presence of an indicator of compromise, right? What if you have seen there is a SHA hash or an IP address? Is it a risk? Well, not really. Okay. Probable threat actors in the infrastructure. Probable broken processes, right? What if you don't have a process? Whether somebody is entering your office, or if the process is broken, or what if you don't have policies at all? Is that a risk? I don't think these are risks yet. Okay, just hold on your thoughts there on before I start a debate. These are not yet risks. Okay, so I've in fact introduced many terms here which might mean different things to different people. I have introduced vulnerability, control, threat actor, process, formal policies. Let's quickly see some definitions before we go into what exactly is a risk. Okay, so a quick definitions, right? I don't want to bore you with theoretical definitions here. There are ample examples provided as well. For example, a particular CVE present in a vulnerability is like a weakness in your information system. It could be a weakness in your security procedures, internal controls. It's basically a weakness waiting, right? Or in a configuration, probably somebody has been given more privileges. There is a SQL injection possible. There is a CVE that is identified, which seems to be score more than 9, right? These are all weaknesses, potential risks. They're not yet risk, okay? But what is a threat? Often in the literature all around the internet and resources, people confuse between a vulnerability and a threat and a risk and things like that, right? Now, threat, the term threat is kind of a circumstance or an event which might result in an adverse impact. For example, denial of service. If it happens that it might have an adverse impact, probably there is disruption of your services, probably there is financial losses and things like that, right? Ransomware is a threat. It's not a vulnerability. Phishing is a threat. Data breach is a threat. Okay, so these are some examples of the threats. Now, who is a threat?
Can I ask a little comment? If you go back, so I always like to think, if you go back to the vulnerability, I like to think that the vulnerability is a fact. So vulnerability should be provable, or should be, should be real, right? And actually, and so when we track our stuff in Jira, we have a ticket for vulnerabilities, but sometimes we also start a vulnerability journey as a fact, because I always view that a vulnerability is a fact that has certain security implications. So you can start with a fact, which sometimes is less politically charged, and then as people agree that, oh, this is actually vulnerability, you can elevate that. But I think we should have the proof, a strong proof, so level of proof that any vulnerability that we say should be based on reality, right? Should not just be, this could happen, because then it falls more into the threat, right? It could happen, but if it's real, if it's fact-based, if it's proven, then it's false vulnerability.
We, in fact, call it as an indicator of vulnerability to make it look and feel more tangible thing, right? Say there's an indicator, there's a real fact there, right? You're rightly pointed out, Dennis. Okay. Yeah. So moving on, threat actor is a person in real. I mean, it can be, I don't know if there are IoT automated threat actors yet, but typically, I mean, the trigger point is it could be a disgruntled employee, a cyber criminal, a professional criminal, it could be competitors, nation state actors, vendors, it can be anyone, like a threat actor, okay? And the impact, most important in your entire risk conversation is the one is impact. What does it mean to the organization? It could be financial, it could be reputational losses, it could be something like a loss of productivity, right? It could be a revenue loss, it could be cost of investigations, penalties, loss of brand reputation, right? This should be something more tangible loss. Even I would say reputational loss is a little subjective, but there should be a tangible impact to the organization. Okay. So moving on, this is the last slide I promised in the definitions. Control is something that a technical or non-technical thing that exists to remediate or mitigate. It could be an antivirus, it could be a firewall, it could be SIEM, it could be policies, it could be trainings. These are controls. Okay. Now, what is risk? Okay, so risk, when we talk, is that a likelihood of threat's occurrence by a threat actor resulting in an adverse impact after exploiting a vulnerability. So we're trying to see that there should something really possible, right? It's something like, a 90% likelihood, some way to put a number. It could be a number, it could be percentage, it could be probability, but some way to quantify. I'm very careful in using the word quantify, because quantifying not always means a dollar value. It could be some way, right? An example could be a 90% likelihood of a cyber criminal exploiting a SQL injection on a website, resulting in loss of data. This is a risk. This is a way that we can have a sane conversation, rather than merely trying to say a SQL injection is a risk, or loss of data is a risk, or there is a presence of cyber criminal is a risk. No, only when we make things more concrete, that is when a risk conversation likely to be productive. Okay, so these are the basic definitions of what.
So on this one, I tend to also use a little bit the word risk, because I like to use the 5 whys. So I like to have every risk. I always say, ask why does this risk? In a way, risk is also why do we care? Why we do
Yeah.
this, right? So you can ask the 5 whys where you can take a risk, let's say 99% of cybersecurity, and you go, okay, so what? Why does this matter? And then you go, well, okay, because there's a risk of compromise, right? Of X, Y, Z. And you go, okay, why does that matter? And then you eventually, what's cool about that is if you do this in a graph where every risk gets a Y or several Ys, you hit on the top risk dashboard. So what you do is you're gonna hit on the top level risk dashboard of the company. And what's cool about this is you more and more you start to get into the business language. So you start to get into a language where you can say, okay, why does this matter for that audience? Oh, because of this. And then you can put a note on it. But it's still the same definition, it's still a likelihood and of threat. But when somebody says, oh, why do we have a likelihood of governance failure? Or why do we have a likelihood of insider threat, or a likelihood of customer data being compromised, or the business interruption? You can go to the next level, and the next level. And eventually you hit this one, and eventually you hit the vulnerabilities, right, and the controls. So yeah, no, really cool.
Super. Yep. Thanks, Dennis. Right. So now, what is risk? This is exactly what I was talking about, saying that there should be a likelihood of a threat happening, an unlikely event happening, triggered by some threat actor, internal, external, political, whichever, right? That should result in an adverse impact after exploiting a vulnerability, right? That's the risk. Now, high-level examples could be, these are the exact examples which, Dennis, you were mentioning few seconds ago. It would be 90% likelihood, or a 10 million likely loss, or 12 hours of downtime. It could be something like an untrained employee click on a phishing email, and then it caused disruption of operations. It could be a loss of revenue because there is a disgruntled employee stole some intellectual property from a file server, and then this is likely to happen. So the language, right, the risk language should be more tangible. It could be a likelihood still, but it should be something that conveys the impact to an organization. And that's how we can communicate risk, right? So the first part of my talk is about demystifying what risk means when I try to talk in the next 30 minutes or so. Okay, so this is what is risk when I'm going to set the context for the future and the problems and things like that. Okay, so let's move on now. Now, what is the goal of vulnerability management? The goal purely is to de-risk my organization from cyber threats, right? When I say de-risk, I'm very carefully choosing my words here. It is not to eliminate completely, because that is an impossible goal that we are setting up for ourselves. But de-risk means to take steps that will reduce the risk, the losses, right? So de-risk means take steps to make less risky or less likely to involve a financial loss, right? This is a more realistic goal of a vulnerability management. I've seen people talking about inbox zero of vulnerability management, or trying to eliminate the risk and all. So let's be very open about this. You cannot eliminate risk. You can only manage risk. You can only de-risk your organization. You can only minimize those losses. Okay, so that's the goal. So when I say in the rest of the minutes of the talk that what is the future of the vulnerability management, I would imagine that the future of a vulnerability management, the processes and the tools and the technology involved, is that it should help an organization to de-risk. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so before even we go into the future and the problems and the solutions, let's understand some of these myths. Okay, so just now I have mentioned that one myth, there is nothing like vulnerability management inbox zero. There is nothing like that. Let's see what other myths exist. Okay, so the first myth is that all vulnerabilities are knowable. Let's be open about this. As a community, we need to understand that not all vulnerabilities are knowable at any point of time, right? And there is super overemphasis on identifying the CVEs, identifying cloud misconfigurations, identifying application vulnerabilities, predominantly getting the focus and attention, which is nothing wrong. But what I'm saying is it's just tip of the iceberg. Okay, so there are numerous other things that we need to look into. The network misconfigurations, or SaaS misconfigurations, or OS misconfigurations, container level, supply chain issues, vendor risks, process gaps, people awareness issues, active directory issues, 0 days, unreported vulnerabilities. There are so many issues. So at any given point of time, all vulnerabilities are not knowable. There will be unknowable. The moment we have this expectation right, it's not that we are going to say, yeah, all are not knowable, but it will only help us in preparing the defenses against them in multiple ways. Okay. Now there are many other myths as well. Okay, what are those other myths? All identified vulnerabilities with known exploits are exploitable. This is another very, very important thing, right? So we have identified a vulnerability. We know that there is an exploit in the wild on the internet. There may not be known at all, but are all of these vulnerabilities which have exploits, whether are exploitable or not, right? That's a myth. Okay, because there are a lot of controls in place. Sometimes, of course, sometimes you may not have controls in place, but there are controls in place. Probably there is an EDR solution. Probably there is a network firewall. Probably there is an anti-malware which has signature for these vulnerabilities that are preventing these exploits. Probably yes, probably not. So that's one of the myths, right? And the third one, little controversial one, saying that all identified vulnerabilities that are exploitable will be exploited, that no one can see, right? Okay, we have identified a vulnerability, we have identified that it is exploitable, whether it's like a ticking time bomb, it may go off, it may not go off as well, right? So that's why I put a question mark there. Now, the fourth one, whether all these vulnerabilities that are they really applicable to me or my org? I've read about this super duper CVE, which impacts, some product, some service. Whether is that really applicable to me? I have some examples a little later, which says that it may be or may not be. Okay, so and can I treat or should I treat all the vulnerabilities of same type in a same way? For example, I have found out log4j on hundreds of my servers. Should I be treating in the same way? Not really, right? So we'll be talking about context and correlation and things like that. This myth is about that. All the identified vulnerabilities about, it could be CVSS 8, 7 are risky, not really, okay? And all identified vulnerabilities can be or should be mitigated, not really. So these are the 7 myths, I would say, which are there right now, which we need to, which are really myths as such, okay? To be more realistic about this whole vulnerability management program that you're going to set up in your organization or running in your organization as well, right? So now, what is the future going to look like, right? So the best way to get there is to invent it into a future into where the vulnerability management program that you are going to plan and build and operate or buy for your organization, which will de-risk your organization from cyber threats. The best way there to get there is to invent that, right? As a popular saying by Alan Kay. But how do we get there? We need to address the current challenges. Okay, so let's look into what these current challenges are and how do we get into the future where it will help us to de-risk our organization. Okay, so in my honest opinion, there are these 4 major challenges in order to make in order to make this vulnerability management give us the expected results. The first one is products and services fatigue, right? I'm carefully choosing the word again, fatigue, because this is one of the main reasons of why we are not getting the results that we intend from our vulnerability management programs. Okay, so there is a product and services fatigue, there is a tools fatigue, there is alerts fatigue, and there is a process fatigue. Okay, now let's spend on each of these fatigues, okay, and then see what exactly is wrong in the way currently it is being done and how to overcome these. Okay, so the first one, the challenge number 1, products and services fatigue, right? Typically, in a modern organization, the number of IT products and services being used to conduct the business are staggeringly high. Okay, so you have SaaS applications, you have multiple operating systems, you have internal web and mobile applications, you are using virtual or physical network devices, you have cloud services, you have databases, and the variety of it is simply high. You have multiple operating systems you are supporting. You have multiple internal applications you're supporting. At least, I don't know, I mean, as per some study, there are at least 30, 40 SaaS applications you are consuming, right? So as the saying goes, we, the security teams, should enable the business, not really become a speed breaker, right? In order to enable the business, we need to let the business choose the products and services they need to run the business. And of course, we are here to help them out to ensure that they're safe to use and things like that, right? So what's the challenge here? How do you track the respective security advisories? Okay, so almost all of these OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers or the vendors, they kind of release the security advisory saying that there's such and such vulnerability that is found, there is such and such misconfiguration that is there in our system, there is such and such backdoor somebody has identified in a device, right? How do we track all of this? That's the challenge number one, to address this products and services fatigue, right? So fortunately, very fortunately, there are standards evolving. There is, as recent as the CSAF product, the Common Security Advisory Framework is evolving. And then the goal, or in order to address these products and services fatigue, the effort that we need to do is to unify, standardize, and normalize all these security advisories using CSAF. And of course, there is a associated standard to exchange the vulnerabilities information as well. There are ample good resources on the internet about these two. I'm not going to cover in detail, but I'm going to say, I mean, in my honest opinion, in order to address this, more and more vendors need to adopt a standard like this, and more consumers can, either build tools or, buy tools that will aggregate all these CSAF advisories so that at least they can be on top of the numerous products and services that they are consuming to conduct their business. Okay, so that's the challenge number one. Now, challenge number two, the tools fatigue, right? Simply the number of scanning tools needed to identify these vulnerabilities are extremely high, right? So there are application security scanners, cloud security posture management scanners, container scanners, CVE scanners, attack surface detection scanners, OS level, network level, database level, SaaS level, or should we call the people and process vulnerabilities also a scanner? Not really, but we still need to track the potential vulnerabilities of people and process related vulnerabilities as well, right? So this is staggering number of high number of tools that you need. Okay, so it's not easy. It's not easy to get everything aligned, right? So the challenge here is that how do you track the respective scanner results? How do you track them? Okay, so let's see how do we address this challenge in order to address the tools fatigue, right? So of course, I see that more and more people are talking about this, like taking a platform approach that aggregates and consolidates and things like that. But we are far from there to have a mature platforms where, that can aggregate the data that is being produced by this number of tools. Okay, so something like you can adopt an open source one like a Defect Dojo, or you can build one like, say, ingest all these scan results in Zira, right? Or you can buy commercial products that unify all this, right? There are of late many products that are coming out there that will aggregate, unify, and consolidate the results from multiple tools, right? A shameless plug here again, there's one of the cutting edge product that we're working on at our company as well. Okay, so if you are trying to set up a vulnerability management program, not only that you need to consider buying or building these individual point scanners, but you should also factor in how do you aggregate and consolidate all these results so that you get maximum ROI for your time and money and effort involved in order to buy these individual point scanners. Okay, so that's how we can start addressing some of these tools fatigue, right? Now, the third one, the most important one, and I'm going to spend a bit of time here to address this. The challenge is alerts fatigue. Okay, so there are simply high number of low fidelity alerts being spit by many of these tools. Okay, so why is that so? We have seen that at least half a dozen scanners, or probably nearly a dozen scanners, are needed for different aspects of your infrastructure. But then what if everyone is spitting out alerts that are of low fidelity and you have no clue where to start? Okay, so why is this happening? Lack of context, lack of correlation. And are there really any exploits at all for this? And how do we even prioritize in a most scientific way? In short, how do I identify the risk? Right? Remember, the goal of vulnerability management is to de-risk, right? So currently we are kind of sitting on a pile of vulnerabilities, the raw vulnerabilities thrown by all these tools. Okay, so let's see how do we going to address this particular challenge of alerts fatigue. Okay, so first one, the context. Is this security advisory relevant for my organization? That's the first question. I happen to read some security advisory, or I got an email from my vendor saying that, hey, this is a new security advisory. Is it relevant for my organization? Now, is this malware or attack or something that you have read in the news, that is the latest one in the town, going to impact your organization? I'm trying to emphasize the context here. Is this relevant to your organization? Is this relevant or is this going to impact your organization? If yes, what should or which vulnerability should I look for? Right? So very important. Like, I'm going to come again, take a little bit of top-down approach, saying that how do you find out vulnerabilities that are most relevant to your organization from this corpus of vulnerabilities, right? So a sample security advisory. This is, I just picked up, I mean, I'm not really trying to nitpick here, Google or something, it's just an example, right? So this is a security advisory. If you carefully observe, the threat information is there. The threat is denial of service due to some vulnerability in protobuf. The vulnerability information is there, which is CVE, right? And the libraries are there, right? But it's still in this in kind of a textual format that is not really machine consumable, right? And there's also information that there's a patch that mitigates this vulnerability, but it's still in English, right? Now imagine there are hundreds and thousands of these advisories that are not consumable in an automated fashion that will reduce the fatigue that we're talking about. That's number one. Right. Let's see another advisory. It's not really an advisory as such, but it's a news article sample, right? I just picked up from the internet. It says that there is some bank that that got impacted, where the attacker stole some $80 million, and they kind of used a malware called as Banswift, and then they used something called as a Trojanite PDF or something like that, right? Now, how do you again translate this something more actionable, that I identify a risk instance here, so that I can make sense whether this particular vulnerability or this particular news item or the advisory is really applicable to me, and whether what should I look for in my internal network, right? So we need, I mean, again, as I said, these are the potholes that I'm talking about, where we need to address in order to get into the future. Right. So the open problems here, we need AI ML techniques in order to derive this risk intelligence. Now, I know there are players who started providing this kind of intelligence, but they're just starting. Right. Now, we need this kind of intelligence in order to enrich the corpus of alerts that are coming. Right. And that will help me to provide context. Probably I'm not a banking organization. Should I really need to worry about this malware? Maybe it will impact only the SWIFT network. Maybe I'm an oil and gas company. Maybe I'm a telecom provider. Maybe I'm some other industry type. Is this malware really impacting my type of industry? That's the context that's missing. Okay, so moving on, correlation. What type of a threat does this vulnerability pose? Now, my tool has given me 100,000 vulnerabilities. Now, what does that really mean? I mean, does that disrupt my operations? What's the threat there? Or do I lose my data? Right? What are the type of TTPs does this threat actor use to exploit this vulnerability? Or for that matter, what are the mitigations? Right? the numero uno problem is not only identification of the risk, but also how do I mitigate them, right? So the correlation is another bigger problem that we need to address. Okay, so there are of late many tools are giving mappings with attack mitre, which will to some extent tell you what kind of a TTPs are there. And there are interesting research advances as well recently. I mean, I'll make sure these slides are passed on to, or I mean, the links are provided. There is an interesting research on how do we map these attack mitre TTPs with CWEs, with CVEs, so that we really bring out the correlation between them, right? And taking it to a whole new level. There is this entire Veris database, which has rich information on how the recent attacks happened and what kind of losses they made. But then there is again an interesting research that a translation layer being built between the Veris and attack. Okay, so these are still in a baby steps. This is, I would say, probably this is the risk intelligence or the risk area, making all these connections possible is in a nascent stages and in infancy. Probably threat intelligence was there probably 10 years back, right? So this is a correlation is very, very important. Otherwise, having raw vulnerabilities and saying these are vulnerabilities without really the correlation with the threat and the likely impact is we are not going to come out of this LX fatigue at all. Okay, prediction. Will someone build an exploit for this vulnerability? For that matter, is there an exploit already available for this vulnerability? Right? Assuming that we do not know or we do not have this information, whether there is an exploit, can we predict? Can we forecast what kind of threats are emerging for this vulnerability? This is exactly the problem when Log4j was announced, right? When Log4j came into existence and everyone was talking, and then there were numerous articles around how are threat actors going to exploit Log4j vulnerability? Can we forecast some of those threats so that we can be more alert? Okay, so there is a good amount of progress. There is this whole exploit prediction scoring system. First.org, you can go and visit, and it's kind of claimed to be a standard now where they're going to predict whether there's an exploit being constructed or not, right? So soon after, I think 2 days or 3 days after the Log4j was announced, I was literally trying to play around EPSs and see that whether an exploit will be made available. And it in fact, I mean, performed really well. I mean, the score was around 0.8 or something, which is quite close. Okay, and there are some advanced research as well happening in this place. Something called as expected exploitability by Maryland University. I mean, there's a link here. You can go around and play, where they are coming up with models to predict these whether the exploits will be built. Right. So there are certain use cases here, in the sense that who will this EPSs or exploitability prediction help, right? I'll cover that in a minute. Okay, so prioritization. Now I have these many hundreds of 100,000 vulnerabilities identified by raw scanners. I have done my contextualization. I've done my correlation. I've tried to predict if there is a prior exploit being built. But then which among these vulnerabilities should we be remediating first, right? In very, very simplistic terms, which one poses more risk to my organization? It's not to any organization, or it is not to anyone, but more risk to my organization, my infrastructure, my kind of a setup, right? So remember some of the myths I have mentioned. Let's try to reconsider them, right? CVS is greater than, pick a number. It could be 7, it could be 8, it could be 9, is not risk. It is not your prioritization. It is not a measure of risk. Even NVD claims that. There's a link here. You can go read about it. CVSS is only severity of the vulnerability, but it is not measure of risk. Okay, for lack of a better metric, maybe you're doing it right now, but there are better metrics evolving. Okay, so EPSs, the exploit prediction scoring system, again, greater than some $X, is not risk, is not prioritization. Prediction is not a measure of your current risk or future risk. Prediction is only one part of this whole gamut of things that you need to consider in order to calculate your risk score, so to speak. Okay, so we can do a whole new session probably in some of the coming sessions of Open Security Summit, or other ways I can dig deeper into the math behind it, the formula behind it, and clearly elucidate. I mean, I've done some plots, probably I'll do it again in a more detailed fashion, that why CVSS is not risk, why EPSS is not risk. Then what is risk? How do we calculate risk, right? So this is one of the, I mean, this is a simplistic view of risk. Risk is threat into impact, and a little bit more, if we dig deeper, double click into it, it's more, it should be technically called likelihood of a threat into impact. Okay, or rather more mathematically, it's a function of, it's not even into or multiplied by or plus or minus or whatever. It should be a function of likelihood of a threat and impact. For simplicity reasons, it's just mentioned threat into impact, or threat multiplied by impact, but that's how risk should be calculated, right? Now, of course, this is a 10,000 feet level description. Now, how do we get there? Are there better models evolving? Sure, there are better models evolving. So there's this whole technique called as analytical hierarchical processing, AHP. It's a well decision science based metric that you can, decision science based formula that you can adopt, wherein in order to calculate your risk score, again, I'm trying to emphasize it's your risk score, your organization's context-based risk score, right? Where you have to bring in your threat context, your impact context, and then build the risk function. Okay, now how do you build? Peeling off the onion layers here, how do you build the threat context? That's when exactly you need to consider your raw severity score, your raw exploitability score. It could be EPSS could be one measure, CVSS could be one measure, right? But you need to consider these two in order to amplify or in order to calculate, not really amplify, your likelihood of threat in your environment. Now, even the exploitability, you need to consider numerous factors. It could be EPSS score, it could be the existing controls in your environment, it could be whether the asset is facing internet or not, whether it is internally facing, it is behind a VPN. There are numerous risk factors that you need to consider before you come to an exploitability score. There is no standardized exploitability score. Of course, EPSS is a public score, but you still need to contextualize it depending upon your existing controls, depending upon your infrastructure, architecture, and things like that. Right, so that's the likelihood of a threat. Now, coming to the impact side of the house, you still need to bring in what is the likely loss? Is it a data loss? Is it customer data? Is it intellectual property? Is it what exactly is that? Right, and whether there is a service disruption that is possible. Okay, only when you bring in all these risk factors, that's when you get a risk score. And of course, we recently released an app. Again, as shameless plug, you can go ahead and look into this link as well. Okay, the score.info, in order to play around and see how the risk scores can be calculated. Okay, so what are the challenges in this risk score? Okay, how do you encode, how do you derive your asset context? How do you derive your organization context? How do you build these algorithms, the probabilities, the aggregation risk score? This is still a risk score at a vulnerability level. How do you aggregate it at asset level? How do you aggregate it at a BU level? How do you get it an organizational risk score? Right. So these are still challenges that we as a community need to solve in order to foster this into the future. Okay. So there is another interesting topic called as quantification. This is like the holy grail, right? This is like the nirvana of risk scoring. What are the likely losses to my organization? Can we put a dollar value? How do I justify my cybersecurity budget? Are we investing enough? Right. So there are models, the popular one being FAIR, of course, but there are many other models as well. I'll not really go deeper into these FAIR models. Probably we can do a whole separate session on the risk quantification and the dollar values and things like that. But I'm just trying to introduce briefly here that there is one such popular model where they're trying to put a dollar value, but there are numerous challenges even in risk quantification, right? So the current FAIR model is only for certain risk scenarios. You still need to, if you want to do it at scale, automation will be a challenge, because for each risk scenario, you may need to build this dollar value, and the risk modeling algorithms in automation is still a challenge. And more importantly, there are certain principles laid in order to come up with risk quantification, like whether the model is transparent, whether there is an accuracy, whether you can validate the dollar value, whether there's a governance in how this model is evolving, right? So there are certain principles that we need to follow in order to come up with a more robust model in order to put dollar value. I would say that still there is a long way to go before this is mainstream. Okay, so these are some of the 3 challenges. We have discussed process fatigue, tool fatigue, alert fatigue. Sorry, we have not discussed yet the process fatigue. The last and most important fatigue is the process fatigue. Now, I have identified these risk vulnerabilities. What next? Right? Risky vulnerabilities. What next? Now, who is accountable? I think, Dennis, these are some of the points that you have started early on before we started the recording. Who is accountable? Who is analyzing them? Well, you could say it's all in Jira, but remember all the prior fatigues, the number of alerts and the tools and this and that. That is one of the main problems that we need to address. Can we live with them? That is the exceptions. How to fix them, right? We need people or automation in place. How do you verify that these fixes are improper? We need automation again. So the challenge, to summarize here, is how do we de-risk our organization? Remember, the goal of vulnerability management is not to identify the vulnerabilities, not only to identify contextualized correlation, but to bring things to closure. That is when you're going to de-risk your organization, right? So we need to, a very simplistic life cycle here. You identify the vulnerabilities, you can mark them as exceptions, whether you want to live with them. Your team can say they have resolved it, and there is a verification phase. Only then the issues are closed. So only when you have these processes that can help you. This is a very simplistic view. Of course, you can customize your states and things like that based on your internal processes. But unless you fix your process as well, you're not going to get better results from the vulnerability management program. Okay. So another way is to bring in automation. Currently, the traditional OODA loops, the observe, orient, detect, and decide and act kind of loops are being applied predominantly in the threat hunting phase, that is detect and remediate phases. I believe that we need to shift left that one, not only identifying, but also applying the mitigations, protecting your organization, and then applying your OODA loops much left of it, so that you can, so the goal again is to remediate or mitigate the risk. Okay. So what are the challenges here in the last process fatigue? Of course, there are a lot of complex workflows. There are diverse defenses. Not often you have APIs and integration to push your automated fixes. It's not really realistic. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done here. And how do you validate them? And how do you auto verify? It's not always practical, right? The complexity of the scanners to reconfigure them. There are diverse attack paths to validate. Of course, there are things evolving, such as breach and attack simulation. But then for the vulnerabilities that you have identified, how do you ensure that they are in fact addressed and verified, right? So these are some of the challenges there. Now, in conclusion, I think this space is a disruption awaiting. We are still in vulnerability intelligence, but soon we'll be getting into, or we should be getting into, risk intelligence rather than just the vulnerability intelligence. So, for example, as I said, like 10 years back, if cyber threat intelligence, we have kind of matured it. Of course, it's still working. It has matured, although there's work in progress. But then, can we get our risk intelligence, the shifting left thing, in this kind of a maturity level? I think there's a lot of work to be done, right? So, what exactly is cyber risk intelligence? It's your vulnerabilities, your exploits, your correlations, your predictions, your remediations. Only when we get there, that's when the nirvana of the space is achieved. Okay, so again, in conclusion, hopefully we'll get into this. We should be getting into this future where things are more concrete and things are more realistic, that you can have a conversation. Right. So I hope you have noticed in this above examples, we're not just talking about a particular vulnerability. We are going to bring in more context around it, and then saying that the impact to your organization are based on that vulnerability. Right? So that's the future, right? So risk intelligence is going to complement the threat intel in identifying the risk and then estimating the likely impact and help in strategic decision making, whereas the threat intel is more of the after the fact, identifying the threat and then mitigating any ongoing attacks and helping in tactical decision making. Okay, so risk intelligence is going to be complementing that and helping the organizations to shift left. Okay, so thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope we have 10 more minutes for any questions. I'll be super glad to take any questions.
Yeah,
Okay.
great. No, pretty awesome. So I was just saying, amazing presentation, right? I think this was really a great whirlwind tour of risk and I know the definitions. I really like that, right? My curiosity is, what platform do you use or what techniques you use to scale this, right? Because basically I'm thinking in graphs, right? You need nodes, you need edges, you need to connect this. Because if you try to do what I just described on spreadsheets, right, it doesn't work, right? So what kind of platforms that you've seen work quite well, and technologies and workflows that you've seen?
Yeah, so if I am allowed to say, that's exactly the product that we're building at Second Eyes and helping our customers to get everything and then build that and then help them de-risk, not just identify the scanners part, I mean, not just identifying them, but the full life cycle, identify, prioritize, remediate, verify kind of a platform. But I do follow your blogs on the graph and the connections and things like that. So yeah, that's the kind of work that I'm doing at my company.
So for example, like what do you have access, for example, to the org chart of the business? Do you actually model, for example, the relationships between the business owners in there? And I guess my question then is, if you do, or maybe if you don't, but then how do you then make sure that when the risk is understood by a particular player, you also give the risk to the management and to the management and to the management, right? Because ultimately the risk needs to follow upwards, right? So how do you manage that, sort of make sure the risk arrives at the right altitude of the organization?
Yeah, so these are some of the challenges that we've faced as well, because the kind of information that we show gets too technical for the management to understand. The moment we try to translate, that's where some of the information is lost. So we kind of generalize it, provide risk at a category level, not really probably at a SQL injection level, but probably at a threat level, and then again summarize it to a high level. But that's a constant cycle that we are trying to see how well we can articulate it.
Yeah. Cool.
Right.
But how do you hyperlink that? So that, again, is that something you do on the platform?
That's what we're trying to do in the platform as well, right? How do you build that and then project it, kind of?
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, my ask to you is make sure you publish graphs and make sure you allow the import and export of data, right, in a way that's easy to manipulate, right? Because I feel that a lot of products, they create graphs, but they kind of stay stuck in there, right? And I think a lot of the data, like part of your value is just to have an open standard, right, where you can change information or people can populate data that you can then consume, right? I think that's quite key. Cool. So Tiago had a really great question. Tiago, are we able to ask? I just made you a co-host, so if you want me, I can ask the question.
Sure. You may feel free to. I'll try.
Yeah, I was saying, if Tiago is not able to, let me read the question. So the question that Tiago asked was, if an organization is starting on their risk and vulnerability management journey, how do you strike the balance between more immediate results and simple approaches, right? So for example, prioritizing vulnerabilities by CVSS scores, simple risk management models. But, how do you manage to strike that balance between immediate results and applying some of these more advanced concepts in order to start things right?
Sorry.
So how do you strike the balance between getting some immediate results, right? Prioritizing goals, etc., but then making sure that some of these advanced concepts are already taken into account. So you're already going in that direction.
Yeah. So what I've seen in the last 5 years working with numerous companies, the immediate results are the ones very, very low hanging vulnerabilities that will give you maximum bang for your buck, that are easily fixable. Things like your cloud misconfigurations, where the APIs are well matured relatively when you talk to application vulnerabilities. So find out areas that are easily addressable. That's when that's how we showed progress, saying that okay, cloud misconfigurations, you either choose a CSPM that allows auto remediation, or some product like ours, where you can quickly show that you select all these, click solve, then you're getting your numbers down. So identifying the ones that are automatable and solvable easily, those are the ones that are going to give you immediate results and support from your management than the strategic ones, right? So that would be my answer to that.
Yeah, if I could just add, I think a lot of these things, especially on a graph, it doesn't matter where you start. What matters is you start to build the graph, right? And I always find that each organization has a center of gravity. I've done now this several times, and each organization tends to, especially the security team, they tend to default to a particular language. And I think the power of a good graph is that allows you to almost reflect the organization in that graph, right? You should be using the language that makes sense for the security team, for the business. Sometimes like, it doesn't matter where you start. So what matters is you have a flow where you're thinking like this, where a lot of these are just concepts, right? They're just directions. You can do this for small number of vulnerabilities, large number of vulnerabilities. The question is, are you thinking like this?
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest part, and bringing it to review, right? And one thing that I guess my other question for you is, what's your experience with the audit functions? Basically, those are the parts of the business that already think about risks. They already have their own risk frameworks.
Okay.
How do you interact with them?
I mean, this is a classic, separation between the risk teams who are not considering your vulnerability management results, but they're in their own frameworks, where in the process and people and process and vulnerabilities, in the classic risk register Excel sheets and things like that, there's a huge disconnect between the ground reality of the technical vulnerabilities and the process vulnerabilities, right? And we in fact stepped up to matchmake between them, and there is always a conflict. Why? Because the teams who are really talking about risk today, they don't understand the technical vulnerabilities. Only when you translate these technical vulnerabilities to plug them into their frameworks, that's when they start seeing results.
But then it surely is a measure of success if certain parts of the business actually use the same language, the same techniques, the same process, right? Because you can use the exact same thing to describe a business vulnerability. You can use the exact same thing to describe a business process vulnerability, or even development vulnerabilities, or other vulnerabilities outside the pure realm of security, right? Because every project has vulnerabilities, every project has risks, every project, like we tend to call a vulnerability more of a technical, or a more of a, let's say, it has security implications. But if you don't ship something and that particular part of the business depends on that, that's a vulnerability, right? If you have a supply chain that is not well designed, if you have other things, and ironically it also impacts us a little bit, right? So I think a good measure of success is also where the business, or we can find parts of the business that adopt this, right? And we're able to translate and make that bridge with the way they think already, right? So for the more risk mature, we should be connecting the dots. And for the parts of the business that are not very risk mature, we should say, hey, guess what? We already come up with this, and it already works, and it's already being used. Can you use it? And I always find that a good compliment is when other teams ask, oh, can we use the same thing for our own risks, for things that they care about? And I think that's a really good metric to think about.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I think we're on an hour. Look, this was great. We need to do a couple more panels, man, where we talk about, there's a number of people. We need to get, Steele Higgins and a couple of other guys that are doing some great stuff on risk, and really just have some good brainstorms and conversations about how to hyperlink these things and how to connect the dots and how to do the stuff. But really, really good stuff. So I'll work with Adam to publish, and also maybe see if we can create smaller videos. There's some really great nuggets in here, right? Of this. So, thanks for your time. And any final words, any final thoughts you want to just share?
I would say this is, as I said, like, this is disruption awaiting the space. The sooner we address this, problems as a community, the faster we get into this future where vulnerability management helps the organizations to de-risk themselves.
Yeah. Spot on, man. Good stuff. All right.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks very
everyone.
much.
Thanks for this opportunity.